Thank you for joining us for our first Antisocial Social brought to you by the RISD Alumni Club of South Florida and the RISD OAR. My name is Rhea Hunter, Chair of the RISD South Florida Alumni Club, and hosting alongside me is Vice Chair Kathleen Finch.
Hi, everyone.
The RISD South Florida Club aims to connect fellow RISD alumni in the region through events and social networking. It is run by a group of volunteer board members with support from RISD OAR. And we'd love to talk a little bit more about it, but we are trying to keep things brief to ensure that all the speakers have enough time for their presentation. So in the meantime, we encourage you to find us on LinkedIn and join the Miami group. There we share events, info, job postings, or opportunities within the South Florida region that are in the design or art related field.
And we also encourage you to reach out for event suggestions that you may have if you want to help us organize an event or if you want to join the board. If you're interested in getting involved, please send me an email, kathleen.finch@gmail.com. It's on the bottom of the slide right now.
Yes, and so thank you for that. And today we are so delighted to feature 4 very talented RISD alumni to kick off our very first Antisocial Social program in this series. Heather Deitch, Luke Jenkins, Jayanti Seiler, and Emmett Moore. Sorry, Jayanti. Thank you for joining us today, and they will be joining us shortly. But before we begin, we have a few housekeeping rules. Each presenter will have 15 to 20 minutes to speak. Logan Rackier is the Zoom manager, and he will be allowing folks to enter the breakout room. So please send him those names of the rooms that you want to visit first via chat. Questions will be reserved for the breakout sessions following the conclusion of all the presentations. Also, to best view the presentations, we suggest that you set your view option to the side by side. And you can do that by clicking on the view in the upper right hand of your screen. And we also want to remind you that these presentations during this event will be recorded and they will be posted online by RISD and may also be posted by any external parties involved. After all the speakers, we will make sure that the videos are, that's turned off, so you viewers will not have the videos on. We will not record the breakout rooms so that you can go ahead and you can turn on your video during the breakout sessions. Those sessions will not be recorded. It's just the presentation portion. And also please have your audio on mute. So thank you. That was the housekeeping for the tech. A little bit about the Antisocial Social. It's an ongoing quarterly series that featuring professional and personal works and projects from fellow RISD alumni in the South Florida region. It's our open studios series, and anyone can join from their own studios or from their home with their favorite, cup of coffee or whatever drink. Hopefully, everyone has theirs and they're settled in and we can begin. I'm ready, and the first one up is Heather. I'm gonna officially introduce you, Heather. Heather Deitch is an industrial designer. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Virginia and a Master's of Industrial Design from the Rhode Island School of Design. She worked on residential and commercial architecture projects at William McDonough and Partners in Charlottesville and Jeffrey Butler Architecture in San Francisco. She also worked on commercial buildings and corporate campuses at Gensler in San Francisco. Upon completing graduate school, Heather transitioned into industrial design, primarily focusing on furniture and consumer products. She designed educational lounge chairs and tables for corporate interiors at HBF and Bernhard Design, both North Carolina-based office furniture manufacturers. She currently serves as the Director of Design for Tucci and Pavilion Furniture, Miami-based manufacturers of furniture and accessories for outdoor spaces. Heather, thank you very much.
Thank you for the great introduction. I'm honored to share a little bit of my work, and certainly RISD had a pretty favorable impression, I think, for me, and I think many others. All right, bear with me while I share what I have here. Okay, so I think one of the classes that there were many classes at RISD that were pretty phenomenal, but one of the ones that had probably one of the more profound impact on my work was a class called Tangible Thinking, and it was taught by Lane Meyer, who's technically went to RISD for graphic design, but taught in sculpture, furniture design, industrial design, architecture, and probably many other departments that I'm not aware of. But when I was looking for classes to sign up for, I had a work study job in the nature lab. And I remember asking a lot of the undergrads I was working with, like, which classes are the best at RISD. And three of them, this class came up in particular. And so what I thought I'd do today was take, his class was basically about how you translate ideas in understandable ways, and regardless of what discipline of art and design, that, it all begins with an idea and how well you carry it out. The other part about RISD that I really appreciated was the high level craft. And I think unanimously, everyone seemed to leave there with a really good understanding of how to make things. So a lot of my career has been focused on that. Did a few little sketches here of, this was actually trying to recreate an exercise of Lane Meyer's. He gave us fortune cookies and would put a word in it. And our assignment was to come back with something that represented the word and that we had made. And sometimes they were exercises in class. Like, I think this was, like little funny sculptures out of straws and stirring sticks. And then everyone had to not necessarily know whose project it was, but identify the word, and you're sort of graded on how well you conveyed the idea. So sort of taking it to a very professional corporate architecture to industrial design sense. I recently did this slide explaining trends in furniture and architecture as it related to design, going back to, when sustainable design started in the late 90s, transition to healthcare, making healthcare more residential like. There was that era of everyone wanting Pottery Barn and healthcare environments. And then the age of I'll call it, wellness and human health. And then in the commercial environments, trying to make offices feel more residential. So the recent commercial, and then we envelope into outdoor furniture. And at least from a profession, I went from commercial interiors to outdoor. And, I would say last year was tremendously hard in many ways, but I think coming out of this, if there is a great thread of goodness, it's probably that emphasis on health and well-being, and how do we, create spaces for that. So then from a professional standpoint, this is sort of a rough little timeline of my work. And the red is when I was in architecture, and then the green is more transitioning into product design and industrial design. And so there's sort of some commonalities between those two. And then really quickly, there's, I think like everyone presenting today, we have a tremendous amount of work, but this was some of my work in Seattle when I was working with Kerf. This was some of the seating I did while I was at HBF in North Carolina. And then Bernhardt Design, also in North Carolina, which then brings me to just a few projects that, going back to the tangible thinking of working with many different people, many different collaborators on ideas. How do you take, in this case, this was a highly tailored idea or tailored piece of furniture, and then make it into this, exceptional thing. So this was a chair that was done in collaboration with Barbara Berry at HBF, and you can see the notes of no seams and these really refined things, and then our prototypes. And then I would say Christine Lagarde she's pretty much when I think of tailored clothing or presentation as a person, she was probably one of the first people that actually had this specified for her office. So it seemed like a good pairing. The second project is another highly tailored piece. And this was just traditional, upholstery. One of the funny things I used to hear in North Carolina was upholsterers talking about, oh, I'm an insider, or I'm an outsider. And it basically meant, oh, I only upholster the inside of a chair, or I upholster the outside. And so this sort of rocked the boat a little bit, because it was, a bent ply panel in the back, and then an upholstered seat. But then we had a veneered outside, and these were studies in proportion and details. The third project, this one was actually, it took the idea, this was working at Bernhard Design. The designer that came in with the concept was Daphne Cause, and her idea was that it would be like a ring, that you would have a seat that would be perched by this base. And so what we looked at was, how do we take a walnut seat and then create a base that supports all of that? So these were 3D printed models. And then we used pretty much like a sculptor uses for investment casting or lost wax, where you take the form and then you create that. In this case, instead of bronze, like a sculptor would do, this was stainless steel. And sort of the fight for a while was with the supplier, was the separation between the casting and then the fabricated base. But what happened in the end was actually the manufacturer, we kept saying, could it be welded? And they realized it would look better. And so the end piece, actually, we were able to make all these fancy jigs. This was a walnut piece being made in New York. The base was coming from overseas. So you had two different vendors, and then you ended up with this, finished piece. And I think this one, I forget what award this one, but it won something at Neocon. And that's called the Lane Bar Stool. The fourth one was a piece that started out at the VIA exhibit in Paris, and it was a young designer. She had worked on an idea for a sofa, and it was nautically inspired. And so we basically took the idea and made it into a commercial piece that could be repeated on a large mass production scale. But I didn't really have much to work off of. There was like patterns, but we didn't actually have access to the piece. So these are 3D models that I created from pictures and from meeting with the upholsterer at Salone. And then it had wood buttons, which, 150 years ago, getting a wood button made like this wouldn't have been an issue, but now it's really difficult. So I actually ended up going to a toy maker in Maine that had a lathe small enough to make these little wood buttons. And the big idea was that there was a suspension, so each one could be adjusted. It was more of an aesthetic craft thing, more than anything, but it also, in some ways, it would allow different comfort. And then underneath here is a series of CNC milled slots for each paracord, and then cam cleats, much like sailing, to adjust them. And then this is some of the work. We converted the SLA prints into injection molding, they were basically two parts because there was a lot of undercuts. So this is the inside. And then the fabric that was used is actually used in medical surgical applications because it wicks fluids, but we worked with the company in France and had custom dye lots made in 3 colors. And then this was just the, I can say this wholeheartedly because I've done a tremendous amount of seating. You usually don't get it right the first prototype. It's usually several in, but this one we got right the first prototype, and we made a lot of adjustments in scale, like the width and things. But this was actually the very first mock-up with all of the foam. There's many layers, like there's memory foam on the inside and high resilience commercial foam on the outside. And then this was the finished piece. And I pulled up a couple of pictures because I think this was the first piece of furniture that I worked on in the age of Instagram, I'll call it. So this was in our showroom in New York. It felt like a little bit like Andy Warhol's red sofa or something, but everyone wanted to sit in it and get their picture taken and put it on Instagram. And then we got quite a bit of press, New York Times and Wall Street Journal and other places. Okay, the next one is, you'll recall that previous chair with the slot in the back. That was basically done with bent ply and cut foam and pretty straightforward. This one was working with the Bernhard design with Corey Grosser. He's an art center professor. And this piece was to have the whole thing upholstered. And it was actually probably the most difficult molded foam project I've worked on. But this was actually the molded foam tool. We had to make it like a clamshell tool to get the structure out of it. And then when we came to upholstering, we actually upholstered in this area and went up and then shot it in sort of a welt groove. And then there was an inside and an outside, going back to the upholsters in North Carolina, and a seat. And so these were some of the models and the back and forth that went into that. And even just the details, like, the slots, the 3D models, the physical prototype. And it took a swivel mechanism, so you can kind of see the evidence of that. This is 3D to actual first article parts. And then these are some of the published pieces. And then the last project that I have, it was actually working with a ceramic artist. She had a concept of, it was Ignacia Murtaugh, Bernhard design, and she came in with this slip cast tabletop. And again, a really beautiful one-off piece, but we were trying to figure out how to make it a mass-produced item. And so the suggestion came up from Bernhard, from our team, was, why don't we try to make it out of walnut? And so one of the difficult things about this, we did use CNC cutting equipment, was you actually had to cut the inside of the wood rim before the veneered panel could be placed. So we did that, inserted the rim from the bottom, and then took it back to the CNC router. And this was one that was like convincing the guy that had the router that this was a good idea. Most machinists don't like to take their setups down, and this was definitely a 2-part setup. But it ended up being a really beautiful piece. And there's an end table and coffee table, and the inspiration, I think, was the idea of the Andes Mountains. She was trying to show this very angular shape. So that sort of brings me to why am I in South Florida, and what am I doing now? I moved about a little over a year and a half ago, I guess coming up maybe on 2 years, in April, to work for a company called Tucci. And Tucci was basically, Dugan Clark's the founder. He's from Coral Gables. It's a 22-year-old company, and concentrates mainly on shade structures, cabanas, and outdoor accessories. And so this gives you sort of an overview of the line. I think the interesting part about what Tucci's done is it's a true cottage industry model. I think when Dugan started out in furniture sales, and when he had a customer that wanted a better umbrella, and he basically went back to his boat rigging shop and made one. And so, I know that we talk about this cottage industries in school, but he and Tucci are the real deal when it comes to an example. And so they bought Pavilion Furniture, which is an outdoor furniture company. It's been in Miami since the 1960s. And I spend most of my time at Tucci, but I also spend time at Pavilion helping them with design briefs, design direction. Here's an example of, sometimes I'll call it just connecting the design dots for a company. Any of these companies, is part of my role. And then obviously designing a lot of product is too. But this one was called the Tides Collection. And it's one that the concept was the shape of waves. And we were working on it about the same time that the Zaha Hadid building was being completed in downtown Miami. And when I learned the concept, the Zaha building is about fluidity. And I was like, well, why aren't we taking the shapes of waves, the tides chair, over to the fluidity building? Because we're, both Miami-based companies and doing a photo shoot. So we did. And ironically, I didn't do a good job putting photographs, but there is Tucci umbrellas installed at the poolside. So it was sort of a happy surprise when we got up to the pool area. And then the last project I'll talk about is this is a new product for Tucci that we just came out with at the end of last year. And this is something that Dugan had been envisioning for a while, but it was inspired. It's by a nautical mast, like on a sailing boat. And so it's called the North Star mast, and it has basically an aluminum extrusion with teak inserts or metal inserts, and you can get it in a variety of what we call our Alumatique or powder coat finishes. And so that's pretty much the projects I have, and I really appreciate chance to present today. And if you guys ever are interested in anything at Tucci or Pavilion, please let me know.
Thank you, Heather. That's quite a lot of good work there. We were talking about Tucci umbrellas, and it's funny because like every single place has Tucci umbrella. I'm like, I have a Tucci umbrella. I think Emmett too, right? And so we're like,
oh, yeah.
Everyone, yeah. So phenomenal. I want to be able to move to our next presenter. We will talk in a little bit, Heather. His name is Luke Jenkins. He graduated with a master's in sustainable design from the Design Academy Eindhoven, the Netherlands, a program with an emphasis on sustainable and humanitarian thinking. His BFA in furniture design is from the Rhode Island School of Design, which focused on making and materiality. 2 years ago, he opened In Bloom Studio in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The Design Build Studio combines traditional making and design sensibilities with computer-aided manufacturing processes such as laser cutting, CNC routing, and 3D printing. He previously held the role of exhibition designer, lead installer at the NSU Art Museum, and taught furniture design and directed the digital fabrication labs at the Florida Atlantic University School of Architecture. His practice emphasizes materiality, sustainability, and a sense of community. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke.
How's it going, everyone? I'm going to be giving you, I guess, a chronological view of everything I've been working on recently, as well as some stuff that I was working on since I left RISD. So this is a picture of my CNC router in my shop. It's a little bit, I guess, chronologically, that's what's going on right now. This is what I first started doing as soon as I left RISD. I'm from the Northeast originally. I got hired by the Florida Atlantic University School of Architecture, and I came down, set up their wood shop, and I started working with the students there on different design build projects. It was pretty much a design build program, so there was supposed to be a lot of kind of practical learning as well as theoretical learning, and we started by building a lot of boats. These are geodesic airlight boats. So they have a really thin bent wood structure with a membrane that's been covered in epoxy so they float. This is another one that was covered in graphite, so it was grayed out. And from there, we started making different projects at different scales. This is a bamboo bridge. I think it's around 40 feet long that we did with some Colombian architects who came up that only work in Colombian bamboo called guadua, which is structural. And that was probably the biggest thing that we worked on. We also got into furniture. We actually made a bunch of storage furniture for the first and second year architecture students. The students I worked with mostly were the third years. And it was pretty cool because they were able to kind of remember where they were in their classrooms in first and second year, and we got them to think about, you know, kind of end users, clients, and that sort of thing, and they could have a very kind of direct connection to what the specific needs for the users were. This is a double storage unit. It has like a timber roll. They got pretty nerdy with some of the things that they did. Just because you know, when you're an architect, you're designing structures and buildings and stuff like that, and then you get asked all of a sudden to make like a piece of furniture, you have a tendency to kind of like mush as much into it as you can, because it's a completely different scale. I also taught furniture design there. This is a lounge chair and a side chair that a student made for him and his daughter. The underside is all painted in kind of primary colors. So that's the front of the lounge that kind of pops out for like a little bit of storage. And he made this tunnel that you can crawl through with these bright colors underneath. So at the same time, I was working at FAU. I was making my own furniture and art. This is a small line I did that was using scrap pieces of wood that were re-glued together, and the gaps in the top and the legs are pretty much about the amount of each material, the amount of each species of wood that I had. So I made this bench, and then I had some leftover scraps from the bench, and I made these two stools. I made the first one on the left first, and the one on the right is a little bit more deconstructed, and that was kind of the last of that project. And that's it glued together. So it's trying to use as little material as possible without breaking them apart into little pieces. This is a big boulder I made. It's about 4 feet tall, 8 feet long, and it was made to be placed outside in different parts of South Florida, and it was always oriented the same way to the sun. So the face that you're seeing right now was always getting sun. The backside started getting like moldy, and it was all about kind of being an index of the environment around it, and kind of cracking and falling apart, and eventually deconstructing itself. When it was exhibited indoors, there was a light inside of it, so you could kind of see how it was starting to break apart. And at some point, I decided I wanted to go to grad school, so I went to the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and this is some furniture I made with some friends of mine that were also students there. We did a pop-up shop for Dutch Design Week and curated a show. The furniture is just folded cardboard that's been taped together with paper tape, and it was very much meant as a kind of transient design. So you just fold the cardboard up, put it together, and when the show comes down in a month, you can kind of take it apart, fold it back up, and then send it straight to recycling. So I came back to South Florida after the Design Academy, and I maybe 3 or 4 years after, I started working at the UNSU Art Museum as the exhibition designer. And at that point, I started getting more into CNC routing and laser cutting as kind of a necessity for different installations. And that was pretty much all outsourced. We had a really small wood shop in the back, but most of it was outsourced. This is a entryway to a show that was called From Within and Without. There is a piece of plexiglass on the bottom of the sign that has "Without" written on it. So it's not painted. It's just a single spotlight that is making the design. And the pieces in the back on the wall are CNC routed as well. So I started getting really interested in the opportunity that digital fabrication would afford me as a maker and a designer as well. This is another exhibition we did Bellissima Italia. It was a fashion show. We did a bunch of these curved platforms that I got CNC routed as well. And we built the structure on site and just kind of wrapped everything around it afterwards. These are my models. So after that, I actually went back to Florida Atlantic University and started teaching and working there again. It was, at that point, it was less of a design build program, and they had also gotten a bunch of digital fabrication equipment. So I was running those shops, running the wood shop, as well as like running the CNC router and the laser cutter rooms and the 3D printers. And I really wanted to use that as an opportunity to get a little bit more comfortable with it and the use of all of the equipment. This is some more student work that was a little bit more about kind of interactivity in furniture. So the blue platform is on these like big car springs, and it was about kind of these two sheltered areas of two people sitting, sharing a piece of furniture with one another, but also as soon as you make any motion when you're sitting on it, it would have a big reaction with the person that you're sharing the seating with. This was something similar. It was kind of a lounge that was on these, I think, rollerblade wheels that were super crazy. So it moved super fast. It was kind of dangerous, actually. But that was a really fun piece that one of the students did. And then this is another one that is about kind of shutting yourself off from what's around you and taking these brief rests. That was actually meant for a specific place in the architecture studios. And a couple years in, I decided that it was time to open my own shop up. Oh wait, sorry. This is a model that we made for an exhibition at MoMA in New York, and it was all 3D printed and laser cut. It was for like a really brutalist Yugoslavian museum, actually, and we decided to kind of utilize a translucency and transparency so that you could see through the entire structure and understand how it was all laid out. So yeah, so I opened my own shop up at the end of 2018. I've been open for 2 years and change, and it's just a big shop with a CNC router and a laser cutter, and we work on a lot of different projects, furniture, art fabrication, and this was one of the first projects we did. It's, I think, a 5 by 7 foot architectural model of downtown Fort Lauderdale, and this was a proposed building for the AIDS Health Foundation. The building's 3D printed, and it's lit with LEDs from below to kind of highlight it in this other kind of neutralized sea of buildings. This is a sign I made for Broward Cultural Division. They had a bunch of inflatable art that was kind of traveling around the county, so I made these poppy signs that travel around with them. This is a dining table I did for Frances Bishop Good and her husband. So the far end of it, they could have breakfast together. It was like pretty narrow and intimate, and when the whole family came over, they could all kind of gather around the bigger curved part. Wedding arch I made. So a lot of this stuff is CNC routed. I'm really interested in kind of utilizing a lot of curves right now because I guess it's a lot easier to do with digital fabrication equipment than it is by hand. And coming from like a hand making background, I think it's something worth looking into right now for my personal work. This is a laser cut award I did for the chair of the Broward Cultural Council that was stepping down. It's laser etched acrylic plexiglass that's been painted by hand afterwards. And I do a lot of stencils and things for different painters and clients, and signage. This is laser cut signage for an exhibition at the African American Research Library, as well as some art that was made by high school students that we laser cut out. This is some kind of three-dimensional armatures for a painter, actually. So I make a lot of forms for her, and she stretches her canvases over them. This is art I made for another artist. So a lot of what I do is kind of working with, I work with a lot of artists, and I work with a lot of artists who either kind of specialize in 2D work and they want to get into 3D, or they already do some three-dimensional work and they never kind of got over like the digital hump. So I work with them and I help them get into kind of new phases of their own work. This is some furniture I did. It's a couple nightstands covered in gray milk paint. And I'm pretty interested in milk paint in my own work. It's a really old paint. It's just milk protein and pigment essentially, and it bonds to wood really well. And since it's really natural, it's super kind of pastel. You can't get any really bright poppy colors with it. This is a bed I made. It has it's old school like wood on wood joinery with some elements that have been CNC routed as well, like the corners on the left in the photo, as well as the little feet on the right. These are some pedestals I made. It's more like handworky stuff for Francie Bishop Good as well. So those are her sculptures on top, and I made the individual pedestals underneath. And then this is getting into my own work, like what I've been working on for the last few years. These are some lenses that have been mounted with 3D printed parts to a piece of perforated aluminum, just like industrially perforated. And the lenses all have different focal lengths, so it's focusing on different parts of the material that it's sitting in front of. So I'm kind of interested in the way that you can be really specific with, in this case, 3D printing. So each one of these lenses, if you look at both lenses, they're different thicknesses, even they're the same size. So I designed each one of these mounts to hold different thickness lenses. And I guess I'm interested in the kind of repeatability of everything, even though things are just trying to kind of like changing slightly. This is similar to that. It's a bunch of laser cut mirrored pieces that were in an exhibition in Fort Lauderdale, and they just reflect onto the wall behind it. Some more furniture, laser cut legs with architectural cedar beams. And I started laser etching patterns into them and kind of having a visual activation. Like there are more effects in this one where if it's not in use or if you're just looking at it, it still has a really strong visual presence as you're moving. And this is one with a bunch of dots in it. I think is it's fun. It's fun, and it's creating a pattern that is definitely perceptible, but it's like a mushy pattern, I guess you could say. Granite bench top with laser cut legs. So this is something I started making a few years ago. It's kind of like a binary chain of these parts that clip into one another, and it just makes a big rope that you can kind of manipulate as you want to, or put it on a wall. I made it with plexiglass as well, and these are pieces that can all join together in different ways. So it's kind of utilizing like a single element and chaining it together to manipulate it in really slight ways. So the idea behind it is that you have a really small amount of flex in each one, but it creates something that's super flexible the more pieces you connect to it. This is some laser cut wood veneer I did with all the slogans of the presidents that were running for, or the candidates that were running for presidency, from my year of birth to the present. And I thought it was a fun way to kind of incorporate laser cutting and bleed through. Like I stacked all the pieces of wood on top of one another, and you can see that it's going through the same text is going through different layers of it. And this is what I've been doing a lot of recently, just CNC routing plywood and trying to get to the different layers through the plywood. So plywood is made of several different layers of wood that have been stacked together with glue in between. And this table is using found legs, and the top is just routed through in radiating circles. So the three circles in the middle are the top layer of the wood, the top layer of the plywood. The second layer of the plywood is the three circles on the outside, and the third layer down is everything else that you can see, and it's really only going through like a 16th inch. This is another piece, same thing. It's a CNC routed plywood with a small plexiglass key at the bottom that separates the two halves. This is a bench I made that is also kind of about this repetition that's slightly changing as it goes through the different top and legs. And this is following the same idea as well. So it's got some really slight changes in the pattern. It's easiest to see if you look at those kind of three black spikes. The spike on the bottom is a little bit smaller than the two on top, and it's meant to, I guess, try to address the repeatability and the perfectness of a CNC router, and how, as an artist or a maker, you can how I guess inject like the human touch back into it in some ways. That's what's most interesting to me about these pieces. This is a side table. The geometry and the patterning is based off of the negative space, that oval in the bottom. And most of the pieces that you're seeing are all based off of either the outside perimeter of a shape or the inside perimeter, depending on the pieces. And then all of the patterns and geometries are just slight manipulations based off of that. So again, this is more about pattern making and kind of how it gets abstracted in slight ways. That's a detail, just kind of showing the different layers of plywood as it cuts through it. The paint, the colored part is all milk paint, and it's been painted beforehand and then carved through afterwards. So I'm really interested right now in these little weird patterns and like little cutouts going into wood. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Luke. Again, that was Luke Jenkins of In Bloom Studio. Thank you so much for sharing. That was some great work. And just a reminder for all of our attendees, we are going to be having breakout sessions following the rest of the presentations. So if you're interested in talking to Luke or Heather or our next two presenters, Jayanti and Emmett, please chat in the chat feature to Logan Rackier, and he will place you in those breakout rooms so that we can have more conversation following all of the presentations. Right now, we're just going to take a 2-minute break so people can just refill their drinks, grab a cup of coffee, and then we're going to pick back up with Jayanti Seiler and then close out the presentations with Emmett Moore. So just a minute or two, we'll let everyone take a quick break. Couple more seconds, get everyone a chance to take a quick break before we pick back up with Jayanti. Everyone, we're going to give everyone just a few more seconds. Again, as a reminder, if you haven't already messaged Logan Rakier in the chat, please do so and let him know who you would like to chat with following the rest of the presentations so we can have some great breakout sessions following this. Jayanti, are you ready if I start now? Okay. Great. Well, to move on to our third presenter, I would like to introduce Jayanti Seiler. Jayanti received her Master of Fine Arts degree in photography from the University of Florida, where she was the recipient of the Graduate Fellowship Award. She earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in photography from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2000, where she received the T.C. Colley Award and Scholarship. Jayanti is a native Floridian, and her family goes back generations in Miami. Jayanti has generated wide-ranging photographic art for over 20 years. As an associate professor at the Daytona State College Southeast Center for Photographic Studies since 2011, she teaches courses in photography, design, and videography. She advocates for the welfare of animals, using photography as a vehicle to incubate discussion, broaden awareness, and ultimately bring about change. Jayanti works alongside activist groups and volunteers at wildlife rescue and rehabilitation centers, where she experiences firsthand what goes into rescue and care for animals. In 2018, Jayanti released a first edition book of her series titled Of One and the Other, about the complexity and depth of human-animal relationships. Her photography has gained national and international recognition in publications including the New York Times Lens, Life Force Magazine, GeoWyson Magazine, Index Hungary, The Telegraph, and Venegas Magazine Contracultural. Jayanti's work has been exhibited at the Southeast Museum of Photography, the Museum of Contemporary Art Georgia, Workspace Gallery, Chiang Mai University Art Museum, and Harvard University. Jayanti, welcome, and I would like to turn over the slides to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the great introduction. I really appreciate that. Thank you to the RISD Alumni Club of Miami for putting on this event. I just think this is so great to have this opportunity to share our work during these kind of tough times. So my body of work of One and the Other is the main thing that I want to share with you today. But before that, very quickly, I want to just mention that I became a guardian ad litem, gal, and in short, a court-appointed advocate representing the rights of children in the foster care system before I made one or the other. And during this time where I was working with the families, I created a film titled Docket, and it was featuring monologues of former foster children and guardian ad litem volunteers. And Docket is just relevant to the animal work and of one and the other because it's about vulnerable people that were taken advantage of basically in the system. The photos in the book are really this dedication to a cause that's so deserving of our attention, I feel, and that is the welfare of animals and how we navigate our complex relationships with them. This is the cover of the book and the back cover of the book here. I'm just going to play this, just kind of flip through the book here while I talk for a minute. So I spent time to make this book among many different people that had different relationships with animals. They were just a list quickly as wildlife rescue and rehabilitation centers for birds of prey, 4-H club, livestock auctions, domestic and exotic animal shelters, wildlife sanctuaries, taxidermy shops, traveling circuses, places where encounters with big cats are sold, falconers' homes, etc. I immersed myself in both these commonalities and conflicts of interest between the groups, and I found these various forms of revere for animals and how this was almost used sometimes to rationalize efforts to coexist with animals harmoniously, but also to control, consume, and even rule over animals. I'm interested in the notion of boundaries, mainly, and with the wild and how they are either honored or crossed. These are just a couple pictures from exhibitions that I've had just to see that I do like to print the work quite large and just kind of bring you into the pictures. So this is an exhibition at the Southeast Museum of Photography in Daytona Beach where I teach. So the topic really goes far beyond the pictures for me, as mentioned in my bio, that I worked as a volunteer in wildlife rescue for many years. And this was one of the locations that I shot at. And so I really wanted to work alongside activists and people that were right at the forefront in the trenches, you know, working with the animals and really be informed as a photographer. So it was just so important that I entered the world of rescue from behind the scenes, in a sense, and being involved, therefore being very informed, you know, and effective with my message. Here I have a picture of a juvenile bald eagle, and he or she is looking at me through the enclosure. I'm looking back at he or she, just sort of in this strange human-made enclosure that the bird exists in for the time being. And with the work, I sought a unique way to talk about this dilemma, this kind of vicious cycle that I could say the caretakers and the animals were caught up in. And I took really careful consideration before I started this body of work to form something that was not radical, that was more poetic, to bring the viewer in. All right, so this picture at first glance might seem cold, and the reason that it seems cold is because the rehabbers had to keep the animals at a far distance from them. So you see that in this picture. There's also a hood placed over this bird, and the bird doesn't look like he or she is in the greatest care, but actually the bird is very relaxed when they put this hood. It covers their eyes and they instantly relax. And so she, as the caretaker, is able to examine the bird and perform, you know, whatever kind of a little bit of an exam on the bird as they're just relaxed for that moment. They're both hiding their identity, or their identity has been hid by me. So I kind of flip and switch things a little bit in the work to where there might seemingly this coldness, but the coldness is because the birds will become imprinted on the humans very easily. And if you don't keep them at a distance emotionally, as a person, or, you know, just physically keep them at a distance, then they will want to come back to you and they won't be able to be rehabilitated back into the wild. they will be, you know, kind of stuck on you, and many other things can happen and they could get hurt again. So just talking about the title really quick, the title references dualities in human-animal relationships, right? And our desire to coexist and protect, which is the of one part, although we exploit and view them potentially as less, which we see them as the other. The other is also someone that we fear or we lack understanding of. And I feel like there is that also lack of understanding with animals, and that they are equal sentient beings and not someone to be sort of treated as lesser than, right? So I have this picture of this wildlife caretaker. She's looking through the fence here of the enclosure, the outside of the enclosure, just kind of beckoning towards whatever animal is behind that enclosure. This is again at the Birds of Prey Center, the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, actually, to be specific. There's this dual meaning in the images. And for example, the distance, like I said, is both humane and necessary to survival. So there's this volume of death that happens in the rescue and rehabilitation centers, unfortunately. And the people, like I said, and the animals are entangled in this vicious cycle, really. Here we have a caretaker that's a little bit different. She's also very altruistic in how she approaches animals and cares for them. She has a shelter. Basically, she's turned her home into a shelter, and she has this enclosure, giant enclosure that's outside of her home that she houses over 130 cats. So she looks like your typical kind of older cat lady here, and she is, but she's completely a saint, and that's kind of how I photographed her. The animals kind of rushed her and got under her arms, and we worked together to sort of, you know, to make this picture. It's collaborative, my pictures, but also, you know, I'm looking at what I see there and working with that to make these pictures. So I don't consider them documentary though. And she's in her other place, which is inside of her home in this picture, and we see how she's just kind of overrun by the animals there. The really cool thing is that nobody is in a enclosure. You see some behind her, those are just for like animals that absolutely can't walk around, that are just, they're being cared for really carefully because they would fall over or something like that. But otherwise she has dogs that just run freely, and the animals there, hundreds of them, are just there to live out their lives. She doesn't adopt them out. She's just an utter saint. So it's the huge commitment and that ultimate sacrifice that you can just see maybe weighing on her here. And my pictures, I want them to be an invitation, again, not a confrontation. They're more theater than documentation, and just seeking this poetic way to represent what I'm feeling about my subjects and lead the viewer into the content. So here's someone named Jody. He is a caretaker that works with tigers, and what he does is something called encounters for pet and play with big cats. So when they reach a certain age, they're no longer able to interact with the public. So he charges people to be able to interact and take pictures with the tiger. This is actually a really big tiger, past the point where she should be being interacted with. So here's a moment between him. It's a little unsettling. We've got the environment that seems very odd. The tiger, just like the bird pictures, sometimes doesn't have, and they don't have identities. That's hidden. This is actually the name of the tiger you'll see in the next scene. On her little card on her enclosure is named Dahlia. And there's this kind of push and pull between him and her, and this sort of satisfaction on his face, but it's meant to be not necessarily praise, this encounter, but more so perhaps scrutinize. And I say things like that because I try to remain neutral. These are people that I did befriend and get close to, and I have respect for everybody that I shoot, because ultimately they all carry a love for animals. This is a really controversial thing though. Here's Dahlia, the tiger cub. You can pay, it looks like $25 to have your picture taken. There's this looming figure on the right, this towering figure that looks like she's taking a picture of this man who's posing with Dahlia. And I'm really interested in gaze in this moment and how Dahlia is looking past everything and kind of, you know, looking towards perhaps the life that she should be caught up in, that she could have. So what we've created are hybrids. That Dahlia can't return to the wild. She's a rescue. She wouldn't make it in the wild, but she's living in captivity here and made to work. That was like a day in the life for her, the daytime picture before. And now this one, you can see those two together. So the images are meant to be seen together. There's this slippery kind of fine line between adoration and exploitation and infatuation, which is disguised under preservation, conservation. There's a lot of talk about that. So I actually had a personal kind of encounter. I can't spend time on it, but I did participate in one of these and felt really guilty when I later found out what I had done, and I proceeded to want to right my wrong in a sense and make pictures about it and incorporate into this project. Okay, so this picture is the same, right? But it's meant to be seen again with the other pictures, because this one is about you being swept up in the moment, just like I was perhaps swept up in wanting to be close to the big cats and participating in encounter and paying for it. And then feeling very guilty at the end of that. It was because we have this, potentially I say we, but I feel like innately in us, like this desire to coexist, desire to touch, embrace, and even romanticize our relationships with exotic animals, especially. We want the viewer, I want the viewer to be swept up in the moment. And it's meant to be considered alongside these other pictures that I just showed, though, because there's boundaries, and are these boundaries necessarily being honored, or they're being crossed? And they're kind of unclear. When the big cats are rescued, right, they're being taken in, and that's a good thing in a sense because they couldn't survive, but then that comes at a great expense. So then I get to this picture. So she is actually kept in these big, beautiful enclosures. And this one's very much like that kind of first bird of prey picture I showed of the woman with her face cropped and the bird with the hood on. I don't necessarily always show you what's there, but I show you a different sort of perspective. And this perspective was a harder perspective, in that what this actually is it's a transport carrier. The tiger is not kept in here, but obviously the picture communicates something difficult. So in order to raise money for these enclosures, the family, the man and a wife, a woman and a man, they take the tiger and put her in this enclosure when they get there. And so you can come up close and take selfies. And so they're at, rich people's parties and things like that, that you'll find, well, that you might find, them there doing that in order to raise money. So again, it's complicated, right? Like they're caught up in this. They have to be able to afford the enclosures, and the animals are caught up in this. Nobody was hurt to make that picture. By the way, it looks like a difficult picture. The tiger was okay. I never intend to hurt anyone, but I did ask for the tiger to be placed in that enclosure when I found out that it was okay, and I could do that. The author, Stephanie Turner, who wrote the introduction to my book, I just went to read a quick quote that she wrote about this picture at the opening of the book, because I really feel like it speaks to what I aim to say. Quote, "The wolf hesitates in her approach to the man sitting near the patch of palmettos. He comes to her territory often. She knows his smell, has rubbed against his frayed blue jeans, and has even licked his hand once or twice. Now, though, she wants only what he is holding, something mouth-watering in a wrapper. She eyes the wrapper warily as he eyes her. He cranes towards her, yet holds back the arm with the wonderful thing in the wrapper. What must she give up to have it, and what must he give up to share it?" End quote. I'm trying to remain as open as possible and put my beliefs and my biases aside when I'm coming to these relationships and meeting these people. This is another caretaker. He's taken in these Alaskan grizzly bears, and this is a close relationship that he has with a juvenile. here, and he runs this kind of business where he does these productions and shows with them and allows you to see this kind of love that he has in this relationship with them that's very unique. And what I made this picture because this is his family. He's holding his child's hand on one side of the fence, and then he's cuddling up to his Alaskan grizzly bear juvenile on the other side of the fence enclosure. And you can see sort of this family portrait with him framed in the middle by the fence. And there's something very unnatural about this scene. There's this clash between two worlds. The Alaskan grizzly bears are integrated into this bizarre, unnatural human space. You can see behind them how they are actually separated from nature, which exists solely on the painted backdrop behind them. And then we've got that looming sort of grizzly bear on the left that is very sort of real and haunting, and they are real. But okay, so here I come to the 4-H club. And the 4-H children are absolutely fascinating to me. I observe these paradoxes while capturing the relationships children have in the 4-H club. I learned that they were taught to raise livestock from birth, and they did this with the utmost care and love, and then they competed. Their goal is to compete for grand champion and ribbons and showmanship awards at county fairs. And I would go to these auction nights, especially I would go to auction night where the kids had to eventually separate from their pet. They would name their animals sometimes and love them dearly. And they had to separate from their animals, well knowing that they would be sent to market, which is to be slaughtered on auction night. So this youth organization is embedded in family tradition and to instill discipline, responsibility in the kids and for adulthood. So some of the pictures are warm, some of them are colder. She's doing something called posting here, where she's displaying how she would present the animal to the judges for me. There's a collision in the pictures of sadness, vulnerability, pride, accomplishment, sense of conviction. The images are empathetic of the children, though, and their dilemma. I really became attached to them in a strange way, even though it's very cold, it's very brutal what happens to the animals. The children openly grieved, and yet they would find the strength every year to return. They all come back, and they do this. They raise these animals from babies. They love them. The animals are gorgeous because they've been raised, hand fed, raised, and they're sent to slaughter. And that's a hard thing, obviously, for children, especially, I can imagine. Touch is always happening in my images and my portraits. There's touch and gesture, and that's a primary means of communication in the images. The animals clearly enjoy that touch of a human, and sometimes they initiate the touch. It's almost hard for me to look at the animals when I'm making these photographs, and I really don't, in a sense. I keep my camera as a divide between myself and the animals especially, and now that I have to look at them as images, it's really hard for me, and this is one that's a little more difficult. You can see the tears from both, in a sense. Is it a tear for the cow? You know, that's up to the viewer. I see it that way. The children are forming these very close bonds while they're maintaining this really profound acceptance for the fate of the animals. And I know with that, I respect the children. They're incredibly mature. They're so polite and they have this strength, yet there's this cruel act. But the children are completely, in a sense, they're innocent, they're children. And yet they're courageously attempting to reconcile two wildly divergent concepts, which is love and loss. Moving on to this particular moment, just really quickly, this is a paralyzed dog that had a blood-borne parasite when she was born. And this is a caretaker hovering over her and giving her a sponge bath, which she would do every day, sprinkle baby powder on her. And that's what kind of consumed this picture with the smoke was the baby powder. And she's bathing the dog on a pool table. And either way, I shot it very theatrical. Components in the scene feel like it's shot on a movie set or perhaps on a stage of some sort. again, that's just sort of what's kind of precious to me about these moments, and altruistic, and something that I see just it's unreal in a way. When I took that picture, I cried when I was taking the picture. It was so beautiful, that moment, and that connection is real. And so then I get to an image like this, and I like to juxtapose my images in my shows and in my books and make diptychs. So I'll show you in a second the diptych between this one and the one you just saw. So there's this performance in this image of tenderness symbolizing irony, and the animal itself, though, as a construction. I went to raise questions. Is the man showing respect for the animal, which is his craft? Hunters have a closer relationship with nature. The animal as a trophy is something we find with this, and here. The resemblance of what it was and parallels this hybridized animal between worlds. And the image is brutal in a way, and it's almost absurd. It's sort of ironic and strange. And I put these two together. I like how the red flows into the other, it's sort of this blood red. And there's this completely compassionate image per se next to another image that's also very compassionate, but we've got a head of a deer. So there's a little bit of brutality and things like that. They're seemingly opposing relationships, but I mirror them together to call upon this overall unresolved, undefined, slippery sense of boundaries. And each image contains its own unique set of questions and irony, which is amplified through the juxtapositions. All right, and finally, what I want to say is that I feel really that there deserves to be just a deeper understanding of our obligations and impact on the lives of animals. And that's why I make this work. And I continue, this is an ongoing project. The work was, just to jump back, was a 6-year project that wound up in the book, but it's ongoing. Animals by definition share our ability to perceive and respond to complex sensations and emotions, sight, touch, smell, also joy, fear, and suffering. Engaging deeply with other sentient beings other than ourselves that we share our planet with can bring purpose and meaning to our lives. And I just really hope that my images encourage that sentiment. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jayanti.
You're welcome.
Those were incredible photographs.
Thank you.
And certainly a lot to talk about in the breakout rooms, which I'm glad that we have some more time that we'll be able to get into your experience with your personal animal encounter. So one last reminder, if you are interested in those breakout rooms, please message Logan Reckier, and if you do not choose one, he will randomly place you in one. So no worries if you can't make up your mind. So again, thank you, Jayanti. And we are going to go to our final presenter, Emmett Moore. I would like to introduce Emmett. He is a Miami-based artist and designer known for a technically rigorous interdisciplinary approach that challenges notions of functionality. His work has been shown institutionally at the RISD Museum, the Frost Art Museum, the Miami Art Museum, the Bass Museum of Art, and is in the permanent collection of the Perez Art Museum, Miami. He was the first Miami-based designer to exhibit a solo exhibition at Design Miami. Moore graduated from the Design and Architecture Senior High in Miami and received his BFA in Furniture Design from the Rhode Island School of Design. Moore is represented by Nina Johnson Gallery in Miami. Moore sits on the board of directors of the Dade Heritage Trust, a group that aims to preserve Miami's architectural, environmental, and cultural heritage, and has recently completed construction of a home in collaboration with Architectonica in Miami's Spring Garden Historic District. Most recently, his exhibition, The Boathouse, closed on December 6th. This exhibition, which opened for 9 consecutive days by appointment only at his house near the Miami River, showcased Moore's recent sculptures, furniture, and his beliefs. And I will turn over the presentation to you, Emmett.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to all the presenters that came before me, and thank you to everybody that's joining us today. My name is Emmett Moore. I'm a Miami-based artist and designer. I went to Design and Architecture Senior High before going to RISD. After RISD, I worked in New York a little bit. I worked professionally a little bit before starting my studio in Miami. I joined the Deitch Heritage Trust to preserve Miami's architectural and environmental heritage, and recently finished construction of a single-family home in the Spring Garden Historic District in Miami. So a lot of my work aims to break down hierarchies in materials and forms within the designed world or built environment, and blur the distinctions between art and design. So I'm gonna start with with my first studio in Miami, and kind of go through some exhibitions I've had to talk about my trajectory, and ultimately wind up talking about the house that I just finished building. So let me share my screen. So when I first graduated from RISD, I moved back down to Miami and started working for a gallery called Oh Wow. And I worked for the gallery, and I had my studio in the back, and I helped them put on exhibitions and things like that, and collaborate with other artists in exhibiting work there. And I really liked this gallery a lot because they didn't really have any boundaries between disciplines. So they showed like tattoo artists, painters, photographers, musicians, skateboarders even. So there was this real like interdisciplinary feel, and breaking down of boundaries between different fields. So on the top right was my studio by day, and on the bottom right was the studio by night. This wasn't every night, but just to kind of give a sense of the things we would do. Everything was kind of malleable. We'd have events and do music shows, or we built a skate ramp in there at one point. So it's kind of the beginning of this like interdisciplinary approach. Here's a bench I built for the gallery. It was my first collaboration with the architect who designed the space, Rafael de Cardenas, who was also a RISD grad. He did this black and white striping on the building, so I designed this bench that would camouflage into it and integrate into the building. After collaborating with him on that, I went to New York and designed the boutique for the Standard Hotel in Miami. So I worked with him at his office in New York, and then came back down to Miami and built this built the installation, which led into a job working as the Standard Miami's art director. So as the art director of the Standard Hotel, my job was to update the property, make it contemporary while fitting the historic nature of the property. So, bringing in furniture, restoring aspects of the hotel while keeping a character, but making it feel contemporary. And a good example of this is the facade of the building, where they kept the original facade, but then put the Standard sign right in front of it. I also have a lot in common with Heather Deitch, because all of the outdoor products we used were either Pavilion or Tucci. So there's a little connection there. This was around the time when I started showing work in Miami. So I really was trying to investigate different aspects of design and the design world. So this exhibition that I did at Locust Projects was about taking materials and patterns within the built environment, and from lowbrow utilitarian patterns to highbrow textiles and materials you would see in like Architectural Digest. So the walls are covered with these murals I did based on security envelopes. The envelopes you get at a bank when to obscure what's in it, like the checks and things like that. And then there's various sculptures and panels made out of different materials. So this blue panel on the left is made out of a high-end veneer called lacewood, and it's in contrast to some of the formicas and veneers that make up these sculptures. The panels on the left are meant to look like pool tiles from underwater. So I'm trying to pull from textiles, from utilitarian objects, everyday architectural materials to the high end. Shortly after that, I was asked to design the exhibition, the last exhibition at the Miami Art Museum, called New Work Miami. It was the current, what was currently going on in Miami in the art scene at the time. So I created a series of installations and wall treatments to contextualize the work in the show. So I used a lot of vernacular materials like this glass block on the entranceway and this kind of Carrara marble mural as you walk in. And I was trying to really play with a lot of the works in the show. So this digital work here, I put on a hedge wall to play with this idea of like interior space or exterior space. And I pulled a lot from the local Miami vernacular. So I put this awning on this hallway leading to the elevators. These sculptures in the foreground were by a local artist named Sinessa Kukek. And he had these really kind of, drippy, seductive sculptures. And I wanted them to look like they were melting on a patio in Miami. So I built this kind of residential framework to look at the works. The paintings in the back were by L'Oreal Beltran, and what he did was he took bus stop ads and painted over them and kind of collaged them. So I wanted the viewer to experience them the way that you would experience them on a bus stop, approaching them from a perpendicular angle, rather than head on like a work of art. And then I used this repeated arch that you see all around South Florida, from the Fontainebleau Hotel to there's a building in Hialeah that has these repeated archways like this. So using this local vernacular element. The breeze blocks in the back is something I've worked with for the past few years. I really like these blocks because they appear in all aspects of design. So you see them like to block dumpsters, parking garages, hospitals, or even residential buildings. So they have this kind of like they cross value systems, I guess, or systems of value. So I did this show at Design Miami in 2014, and I was trying to take these local vernacular objects and make them into modules for furniture. So taking one singular object and using its geometry to create either a functional module or a fully realized design object. So those blocks, they're 12-inch by 12-inch breeze blocks. And I wanted to see how that could relate to the human body. So I made these two seats out of the concrete breeze blocks. This piece is a coffee table made out of 112 machined aluminum cans. The cans are machined by hand. They're not actually, beer cans or soda cans. By using these found objects or found forms, and then using the geometry within that object to create like repeated structures. So the can is made into a 6-pack module. Referencing a cube or the form that that 6-pack cans come in. This object in the front is a shelf made with a cast rubber basketball attached to the bottom. This was kind of an exercise in letting this found object determine the geometry of the rest of the object. So the basketball is a structural element that's solid cast rubber that attaches to the frame, weighing it down, but it also determines the lean of the shelf and the spacing on the glass shelves. This was a show I did at Nina Johnson Gallery called Fracture. This was right around the time I started designing the home that I've just finished building. So I was becoming a lot more interested in in architecture and architectural or construction materials, so steel and concrete and things like that. The main thing I was trying to investigate with this show was these systems that are human-made gridded systems and the way that they interact with one another. So a lot of the forms in this show use common building dimensions and abstracted architectural forms. So these are these various architectural forms like arches and stairs and cantilevers that are then broken up into this 16-inch grid with a in the form of a building block. These are based on plans, so plan views of architecture or city planning, but also the way that these bigger systems, these macro systems, can relate to smaller systems like bathroom tiles or pavers or things like that. So the interesting thing working with these human-made systems or gridded systems, orthogonal systems, they're always meant to align with one another, but they always misalign in these interesting ways when the scale changes or the material changes. So these were studies on these moments that I call fractures, where the systems don't fully line up but create these interesting misalignments. There are also a series of sculptures in this show where I took awning frames and made these autonomous structures. So the idea with that was to take these architectural elements that were also based on human dimensions. So awning frames are built around doors and windows, which are designed with the human directly related to the human body. So then I wanted these awning frames to look like standalone, almost like anthropomorphic objects or animals. This was a commission I did for the Bass Museum of Art. They did a renovation a couple years ago for their education wing. So they asked me to design all the furniture in the wing. And when I first did a site visit, it was a construction site. And I thought that would be a really great way to approach the work because it was for young people. I thought it'd be really engaging to use materials that were already on the site. So the benches in the foreground are meant to look like they're built out of pipes, and they're painted in these various industrial colors. And the desk in the background is meant to look like 3 volumes of diamond plate steel stacked up, waiting to be used. I had done one other public project before, and it was vandalized by a young vandal named Emma. So I realized that if these benches were going to be in an education in the education wing, that they might get names scratched into them or things like that. So I went ahead and pre-graffitied them in the event that happened over time. So if they were vandalized, it would become part of the piece rather than being defaced. This is a collaboration I did with a rug company based in Mexico City. So a lot of my work, I try to use forms and structures that already exist, like found forms. I try not to invent new forms, but to work with what's already out there. So with these rugs, I tried to use one human-made system or one human-made pattern and one natural pattern. So they all feature checkers or stripes combined with a natural material like granite or marble or terrazzo or things like this. And I took these human-made patterns and manipulated them by hand to give them this organic feel before collaging them into these rug patterns. So this was a terrazzo pattern combined with stripe pattern and checkers combined with granite. And these all break they all break the contour of the square rug. So on the right side and on the bottom, you can see how the checkers overlap. So I really like playing with these archetypes, playing within the structure of design of of design forms or playing with the rules for rugs and things like that, and then subtly breaking them or slipping away from that. So I stuck to the standard rug size, but then broke it. This is one of my most recent shows called Danica Sunbeam, also at Nina Johnson Gallery. Growing up in Miami, there were all these warehouses where they collected clothing and shipped clothing to, well, they were import-export houses where they gathered clothing and then exported it to the Caribbean or Central and South America. And at the time, I didn't really know what that was all about, but it had always intrigued me. So I really wanted for this show to use a material that was immediately in my periphery and something that was readily accessible, available, and sustainable. So I started going to these places and figuring out, you know, what is the story behind this stuff? Where is it coming from? Where it's going? Where's it going? And how can I use it? So I wound up buying the material by the pound and working with it like a raw material, like concrete or wood. And I made a body of work entirely out of t-shirts. So the t-shirt is kind of like this, it kind of like encapsulates the core of your body. So it kind of represented this human dimension or one unit as one person. So I put that and I thought this using this one t-shirt, one unit rule. And a lot of the forms in the show reference shipping containers or cargo ships. So the way that they're organized on these gridded systems mimic the way that containers look when they're piled on top of cargo ships. So a lot of what I do, a lot of the way that I work and have worked these past few years is doing these exhibitions or projects and then doing commissions based on the work in the shows. So here's just an example of a few pieces I've done for clients that have been based on work that I've previously exhibited or shown. And here's one of my most recent commissions that I just completed. It's a bench made entirely out of shirts. This is all painted with and I painted it so that it looked kind of like I painted it silver so that it looked kind of like molten aluminum or pewter. So it appeared to be like a cast object, but it's entirely made out of fabric. So the house. This is a house that I designed and built with Architectonica. We've been working on it for the past 5 years and just recently got our certificate of occupancy. So this is by far the biggest and longest project I've ever done. And it kind of embodies a lot of my philosophy on design and a lot of the projects I've done over the past few years. So it's designed around the use of a studio in the first floor. And a lot of the references in the home, the architectural references come from tropical modernism or light industrial building. So it's this real balance of a live-work space with the studio on the bottom and the residence on top. So this is the residential area. A lot of the work in the home I've built myself. So there's one of my shirt panels. Those pieces are cast on shipping containers, so that's what gives them their undulation. And then the wooden tables, you can see a dining table in the background and a low coffee table in the foreground. Both of those were made using local wood. So the coffee table is made out of a mahogany tree that was knocked down during Hurricane Irma from the neighborhood. This is an exterior terrace, so you can really get a sense of this like combination of industrial and residential finishes and fixtures and whatnot. There's also a lot of nautical references too. So these bulkhead lights on the walls, this black netting around the rails. The ladder that goes to the roof is designed to look like a dock ladder and painted pink to make it feel less like an industrial ladder and more like a interior ladder. And then porthole window. Here's another shot of the hallway with some of my work, the basketball light, my red chair prototype made from end of the road, no way out signs. And then a piece from a new series of faux coral, synthesized coral bookshelf. And yeah, it's a view from the exterior. And then this is my current studio in the bottom. So I started with my first studio in Miami, and I'm ending with my current studio, and that's it. And I look forward to anybody who's joining the breakout rooms. And thank you, everyone, again.
Great. Thank you so much, Emmett. And congratulations on the completion of your house. That looks really incredible. So excited to hear some more about that in our upcoming breakout sessions. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. We're really looking forward to having some great conversations for what we did not have time for during the presentations in the breakout rooms. Before we jump into those, just a quick thank you to everybody. Thank you for making the time to attend our event today. And please be sure to fill out the survey that is emailed to you from RISD following this event. We'd love to hear your feedback on this event and what you would like to see in the future. And again, please find us on social media for the RISD Alumni Club of South Florida. We're on LinkedIn, and all of our emails are up on the screen right now.
Yes.
We'd love for you to get in touch with us and to join us in our club.
Thank you, Kathleen, for co-hosting with me. Thank you all for joining us again. If you want to join the future sessions, make suggestions on other series, want to nominate somebody, you want to put yourself out there, throw your hat in the ring, please reach out to us as well. We look forward to bringing more of these and scheduling them during different times of days of the week as well. So again, those suggestions, keep them coming. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jayanti. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, Luke. And we will see you shortly. Bye-bye. You've sent your chat preferences, your room preferences to Logan, and we'll see you soon.
We'll start the breakout sessions. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. See you soon, guys.